Hi, folks.
Hello, hello.
Good morning and good afternoon and good evening, everyone.
G'day.
Seem to have left something in my other room. I will be back in just a sec. All right, now we'll be able to see the screen.
And you said left something in the other room. I thought you meant a virtual room, and I thought, wait a sec, you can leave stuff in other rooms. I'm very confused. But now, I've been spending too much time on these calls. I think that explains why I was afraid not this.
Soon that will probably be the case. Everything will be in a virtual room. Are we looking on quorum, Kurt?
We're at quorum.
All right. Get the slides up here, and then we'll get underway because we have a ton of stuff to get through, I think.
Yeah, it's pretty full agenda today.
All right, folks can see the slides then?
Yep.
All right, well, today is June the 1st of 2023, and this is the Technical Advisory Council meeting of the Confidential Computing Consortium. For those of you in the US and other countries who celebrate Pride Month, happy Pride Month to everybody.
Happy Pride Month.
Good reminder that everybody is welcome here at the Confidential Computing Consortium. This is an open community. Everything we do here is public. And everybody is welcome to come and contribute in a constructive way. If you're not familiar with our code of conduct, you can find copies of it in all of our repositories. Similarly, we abide by the Linux Foundation's antitrust policy. If you want to read more about that, it is at linuxfoundation.org/antitrust-policy. In order to maintain an open community, one of the things that we are responsible for doing is recording what we do in these meetings. You can help Kurt do that with the Etherpad link that you see in the slide here, and that will probably be copied magically into chat already, or soon. All right, so we've got a lot of stuff to get through, and there were a lot of last minute tweaks. So let's take a close look at the agenda here and make sure that we have all the business represented. In a minute, we're going to do roll call and introduce anybody who hasn't been here before or hasn't introduced themselves twice so far. We'll take a look at the minutes from last session. And then we've got a checklist that came out of the GRC SIG to review. We have a project submission from the people at VertTEE. Do we have anybody from that community on the call right now?
Yes, I'm here.
Wonderful. And then Mike Bursell, our executive director, has been circulating a survey, and he'd like a few minutes to talk about that when that comes around. One of the 5 2023 goals that we have is working on adoption of our projects, and that's reflected in the progression. And there's some work that Dave has done and Howard to help clarify those stage requirements. So we'll talk about that. And I think in that same discussion, we might want to talk about the best practices badge, or Dave, do you want to handle that entirely independent?
It could be either one. I don't care.
Okay, I think I'm just going to slot that in there. I think
Okay.
you had put that as one of the graduation requirements, right?
I brought it up during that discussion, but if we go with the remove graduation stage, then it would be completely orthogonal. So that's why I said I don't care.
Okay, so we'll hit the badge content first and then talk about it in context of the stages.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Then we have the annual report coming in from Verizon and a tech talk on the, is it BAO project, or is it, should that be all caps, BAO?
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay. And if we have time remaining, we always have a number of action items to remove. And maybe we'll have a little discussion on tracking those in GitHub issues as opposed to having them in lists in these slides. So to my memory, I think that covers everything I saw on the mail list for this week. Does anybody have any corrections, additions, any other things for the agenda? Nope. All right, well, let's take a roll call so we officially know whether we can vote on anything. Do we have Giuseppe here? No Giuseppe. All right, let me get my window organized so I can see that. Thomas Fossati.
Yes.
Thank you, Thomas. Eric Northup or Shankaran? Nope. I think I saw Catalan on there.
Yeah, I'm here.
Great. Thank you for coming. Howard?
Yep.
Thank you, Howard. Always appreciate you coming in so late at night for you. I am here. Dave, you already spoke. So we know
Yep.
Dave is here. And then Lily or Yash?
I'm here.
Thanks, Lily. All right, yep, so that brings us well over quorum. So with that, like I said, everybody's welcome to join our meetings and contribute in constructive ways. So those were the voting members of the TAC that were on the previous slide, but you can see we've got quite a few more people on the roster today, quite a few more people in the participants column of Zoom. If you have not introduced yourself in our community at least twice, feel free to come off of mute and let us know who you are, where you're coming from, and what you're interested in, what your interest is in confidential computing.
Yeah, hi, my name is Sudesh Mowgli, and I am joining in from San Francisco. And my interest in confidential computing is, I'm actually from Beekeeper AI, and my interest in confidential computing is looking at how sensitive data can be analyzed without actually exposing it.
Great. Well, nice to have you and Beekeeper here. And I think a few of your other colleagues here in the past.
Yes.
Hello, Sandro Pinto here. I'm the one that is going together with Jose presenting the BAU project. So BAU is a sort of infrastructure to provide the confidential computing value. So looking forward to present the project to all of you.
Wonderful. Thanks for coming.
Hi, I can quickly introduce myself. I've been on a couple of calls before, probably a bit of a lurker. It's Mark Bauer. I'm partnering with Mark Novak and the team on the GRC subcommittee. We do have other representation from Anjuna here today. My particular interests relate to the potential for emerging regulatory positioning for confidential computing, hence the work we're doing on the GRC, and then the partnering that we're doing with the CSA that I've been helping cajole along. So that's it from me.
That's great. That's super important to us all. I see one or two other names, so don't be shy. And if you'd rather not introduce yourself, you are certainly not obligated to. Just give one more minute for anybody else to introduce themselves. Was somebody about to come off there, or did? Oh, okay. Let's take a look at what we did last session. Thanks, Dave, for already giving a thorough review on this. I've also reviewed it, but I didn't give it my check mark. So we were able to reach quorum last time and approve the minutes of the previous session. We also had an introduction from one of our outreachy interns. It's a good reminder for all of the project participants and even the working group participants, SIG participants, that we have opportunities to help grow our community through the outreachy internships. We had a board meeting before the last session. We gave a little recap of what happened there. And then we got into the progression discussion. So Howard had previously opened issue 160, and Dave opened a new issue to talk about some things that were historically left undone and that we wanted to move forward. He presented two different paths there, and I think we will recap that in a little bit. We had a tech talk from Key Lime. Key Lime is a prospective new project for the CCC. They are already established in the CNCF, but see benefit from spinning off a new sub-project over to the CCC. And that's pretty interesting because we get more sort of cross-organizational collaboration going on, which is one of the 5 goals that we have for the 2023 session. We also gave an update on community health. So this is one of the other 5 goals for us, is continuing to improve the health of our community, making sure that we're including everybody in the broader technical community. So we gave an update on a couple new things that we're going to be doing for 2023 and recapped our existing programs, including recommending to all of our community that they take this Linux Foundation course on diversity and inclusion in open source, which is very specific to open source. And then we had an update from the attestation SIG. Sean Wei brought us up to date, and Dave sort of challenged him on whether we are producing code, whether we ought to focus on that a little harder for the rest of the year, or correct course on the mission goal for the SIG. And license scans came up in that. We've historically not seen a whole lot of license scans from across the projects or SIGs, so we're going to get a refresh on that at some point. We took an action item on that. And that brought us to close of the meeting. Does anybody see any corrections that need to be made? All right, I'm going to move us to a vote then. Are there any voting members who need to abstain from this vote? Are there any voting members who object or who are not in support of the minutes? Okay, hearing no abstentions and no objections, the minutes of the May 18th meeting are approved. And that brings us right up to the GRC SIG's customer guide and checklist. Owen, would you like to share anything for this?
Yeah, so I did send the document in email, but I can share my screen so that I can go through the document. I do not have a presentation, but what I would like to do is just give a quick intro. Let me see if you are able to see my screen now.
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah, so what I would want to do is quick give motivation for the document, some of the approach that we took, and next steps in terms of what we want to do with this document. And I'll start it off, and we have other members from the GRC SIG who contributed and worked with me on this. So I'll let them pitch in as well if they want to at the end after I complete my first introduction. So I'll start now. So the quick motivation for this document was essentially to empower users to ask the right questions when they talk to confidential computing vendors and providers. So that was where the motivation came from. And it's not meant to be like a yes or no on whether a service is confidential, but it points users in the right direction and with the right questions that they could ask vendors and providers. So the approach that we took, so we reviewed the CCC documentation, including the TAC white paper on the technical analysis, and also some of the recent publications that went through the common terminology. So we went through that and sort of tried to compile that into this. I shouldn't call it a cheat sheet, but essentially that's what we were trying to see to get conversation started. with vendors and providers. So we picked the 4 properties of a TE as defined by the TAC white paper: data confidentiality, data integrity, code integrity, and the attestation process. Like there were requests to add code confidentiality into this as well. But I think that's something we would like to discuss with the TAC, because that was not a mandated property. But we did not touch the other properties that were in the TAC, but just focused on the 4 key properties. So let me just quickly scroll through. It takes the form of essentially a questionnaire. The first one obviously is, does the solution or provider just tick all the properties that are deemed essential? And then the attestation part of it goes into a bit more detail. We provide definitions of what a TCB are, what an evidence, what is a signed hardware report, and what we mean by a root of trust. I see Dave has started putting comments. And the attestation one, because we feel that is important property for confidentiality, it expands a bit into multiple checklists rather than the initial one that has just a tick mark on the 3 properties. It expands on it on what do we expect an attestation report to have, or to be the root of trust that needs to sign it. This next one, memory isolation, this was essentially picked from the terminology document, where there was a discussion on the different types of memory isolation technologies that are provided, with the option to, we wanted to make sure we don't restrict it to just what was defined in that, but also if there is another one that the vendor or service provider feels is an effective memory isolation methodology, that is there's an option to add that as well. So that is the very quick introduction to this document. It's not too long, but we tried to compress and provide these based on all the CCC white papers that were put out. Where we want to take this is we want the TAC to review it, make sure it's technically sound, and then the next step would be to publish this through the CCC. I also want to leverage this document. So I also work with the outreach committee. So I want to leverage this for any analyst meetings, etc., where they could maybe use this as a starting point to understand confidentiality as well. So I know I spoke a lot. Like, any questions until now, or if any of the other GRC members, SIG members who want to speak out, yeah, I'll let them have the floor.
Hey, Pavan, this is Alan Jasinski from Beekeeper. I was looking at, I forget who wrote the blog on attestation, someone in the group here.
Yeah, it was Alec. Yeah, I don't know if he's here today. He's Alec Fernandez from Microsoft. Yeah.
Is there any logic of trying to combine those 2 things, so it's kind of keeps everything consistent across the messaging?
So Alec did review and had his input on the attestation part of things. We could definitely link to that blog or provide references on where some of the questions that were inspired from the blog post, but we can definitely add that, add a reference to that here.
I think the blog posts just in general are kind of, snapshots as opposed to white papers, which are like permanent and updatable. And so usually I don't think we go back and update previous blogs, just kind of a statement of the snapshot in time, right? You could do a new blog or something like that. But that's a comment. Yeah, that's a comment not specific to attestation or anything. That's just about a blog series in general. So,
Right. It was pretty, it was more in depth than, for instance, the attestation in this more paper. So that's why I brought it up.
Yeah, this is definitely.
Sure. Yeah, if there's information in the blog that would belong in here, that would be a great point. Yeah. I'm happy to discuss either of my two comments unless other GRC people have things to add. Because my second one is, I think, purely editorial. So because this is one that I talked to, I think, Alec about. So in the terminology white paper, we have this diagram about technologies, and it's shown as a couple of different categories and then ways of implementing the categories, right? And each of the technologies has a line to at least one of each thing in each category. And here it looks like the intent is there's just a bunch of check boxes, right? Without anything that says, okay, you can call yourself confidential computing if you check all the boxes or at least one box or one of the top boxes and one of the bottom boxes or whatever. And I thought we should try to match the terminology white paper and using the same kind of taxonomy as, check one of the first category and one of the second category, or I should say one or more of the first category, one or more of the second category. And then I think it will match the terminology white paper.
Yeah, I think that white paper actually said something. It had very distinct criteria for being able to say you're accomplished computing, and I think one of them was attestation, if I recall, and I can't remember like if there was the other ones, but there was like the main one was.
Oh, we've recently added attestation. I mean, the other things that's hardware based.
Yeah, I'll go back to my other comment, but here I'm specifically talking about the list that starts with access control validation and so on. If you look at the diagram that I think Eric Voigt put together, if you look at that one, I don't think it quite matches just a flat list is my point. So there's an editorial point. I don't think there's any technical stuff here. I'm saying we should just make this kind of match the same taxonomy as that uses. The language is the same. It's just you got to group the checkboxes appropriately.
Yeah,
I think I agree. And you're right, it's not explained here, so it might be confusing. So what we can attempt to do is categorize these based on the same diagram and maybe even have the diagram here for reference. So I'll
that's
try
a good idea.
Change.
Yeah, that's a great idea. My other comment is a technical comment. This one is just an editorial comment.
Let me go up. I'm guessing this one.
Yeah, that one. So right now it's a comment on the component that provides the root of trust of the attestation evidence is hardware based. Okay. And so someone could read this to say, I have mutable firmware that provides measurements to the hardware TPM. And I'm saying that is not sufficient to claim that you're hardware based attestation, because once you have mutable firmware, you corrupt the mutable firmware, and now you feed garbage into the TPM and you'll get a false report out, right? And so they can check this box according to one interpretation and still be flawed, okay? And so my point is that the language here is not sufficient. There are going to be two checkboxes. We can change this one. I am not the TCG expert. Maybe somebody on here is. I know that the TCG has some term that's root of trust for measurement. I don't know if that's what I'm talking about that says the thing that feeds in the first measurements has to be hardware and not mutable firmware. Or if that's something else. We need to somehow get that concept in here that says whatever the very beginning of your evidence is, that has to be rooted in hardware, and just having a TPM that can sign arbitrary stuff is not sufficient. So,
I thought we defined. No, we did not define what hardware based is. Okay. Yeah, I think we'll need to work that in here. I thought we had the definition here. It does not look like we do.
Yeah, I'd want a TCG person, maybe Hank or somebody, to check the language here just to make sure it's consistent with the TCG terminology. We don't have to choose to use the same terminology that the TCG uses. We could, but if you think there's some other layman's term that has the same meaning, that's okay too. But I would want a TCG person to kind of double check that we're not misleading people.
Agreed. So I can look up the contacts and request for review. But yeah, I agree. I think this does introduce the ambiguity here, so we need to address it. Yeah. Thanks for that, Dave.
Yeah.
So I have some maybe broader thoughts. When I first saw the idea of a checklist, I thought, hey, this sounds great. Let's help guide customers to the right solutions, or help them see if the solution that they're tending towards actually satisfies their requirements. I'm not getting as much of that on the whole from this paper. The paper seems to me a little bit more bottoms up, like here are properties of TEEs, and you can go ask whether those properties exist. I think it would be beneficial to have either incorporated in the existing sections or an additional section that kind of prompts the customer what their requirements are. What is it they're trying to do? Are they trying to protect a process? Are they trying to protect PII? Are they trying to protect something that goes through a number of transformation stages? And help them map those requirements to TEE capabilities. That's probably a bigger lift, but I think that will also help differentiate this paper from some of the other things that we've produced.
So if I understand,
especially considering that most of our customers wouldn't know, like, or necessarily want to get into all these details in any case. Right? I think, you know, our challenge is just trying to tell them in general what confidential computing is and what attestation, how attestation fits into it, or anything else, right? It's just very, I don't know if they'd be able to handle a checklist of this technical detail. Yeah.
You're saying that in the context of the current state of the work, or you're saying that the additional stuff that I'm suggesting?
Oh, I'm just saying, and just in general, like, you know, when we are talking to potential customers that are interested in the end, you know, benefits, like this level of detail and how to get there is pretty much beyond them. Right?
So it feels to me like this is a good reason for the CCC to be doing it, in that it provides foundational uplift for the customers who, as they get there, we need to provide all the other stuff as well. And if there's stuff that that's needed, we haven't provided, that'll help provide the sort of information that your customers level, then we need to do that as well. But I think for the more sophisticated customers, and to show that there is, you know, a real corpus of and a framework to go forward with, that's a good thing, would be my view.
Yeah.
So just to address Alan, comments and thanks for the pitch and mic. So this is not meant to be completed by customers, right? This is meant for customers to intelligently talk to the service providers to say that this is what the CCC defines as, or has the properties of confidential computing and TEs are. How do you fit into this, right? And I completely agree with needing the other parts of it that directly deal with customer scenarios. And we do have like Mike from Intel, who is part of the outreach committee. Like we're trying to work together to put together a use case document. I know there are several out there, but something more detailed that goes into the requirements of Dan, as you mentioned, what PII protections, etc. are. So maybe we could frame that as complementary, or try and connect those two. So that's one idea that we could do.
Right.
I should say that I'm very, is it Alan? I'm very aware of the sort of the feelings, having, you know, been a startup and having exactly the same problems you've had, and we do need to do a bigger job of the basic initial education. I don't think this document is necessary for that, necessarily that thing.
Well, certainly from my standpoint, like my plan is just within our own company, just to consolidate as much of this information as possible into something that would be useful for us to explain to our customers. So it's definitely appreciated that we have all this source documentation that it can draw from.
Any more? Again, I don't think the intent was to complete the review here, but a couple of things I did want to understand. So I think the intent is to publish it through the GRC committee, but we would love the TAC to review it and make sure it's technically sound and also get feedback. So I'll leave the document link in the chat as well. If folks could review it, put in their comments, and I'll also work through some of Dave's comments here and address those. So yeah, I think those are the next steps for me, at least. Get TAC's blessing on this, and then any feedback, and then take action items and get it published through the GRC.
Thanks, Pawan. This is Mark Novak. So I wanted to draw attention to something that Fawal said in the very beginning. So ultimately, look, the reason we want this guide to exist, and it doesn't have to be within GRC, but this is where it started, is customers should have a easy way of figuring out and comparing different confidential computing solutions without necessarily getting a PhD in the technology, if at all possible. And one of the things that we noticed in that is when comparing solutions from different vendors, there are legitimate cases, and I can speak to some with my current employer in my industry, where code itself must remain confidential. So where the consortium currently does not list code confidentiality as one of the confidential computing properties, we're perfectly okay with it being optional, implemented by some vendors. But when we're talking about a checklist and comparing solutions, if code confidentiality is not even allowed to be listed because it's not one of the consortium approved properties, that creates a problem. And it also will create confusion when inevitably some vendors will start offering it, but then we will not have a good way of evaluating and comparing the offerings from different vendors against each other.
Yeah, that's again where I think if you're helping guide a customer from their requirements to a confidential computing offering that matches those requirements, that's where that should come out. Because if they, for whatever they're trying to do, they don't need code confidentiality, then it's not relevant for them to ask about it. But if they need code confidentiality and they're not asking about it because it's not a required aspect of confidential computing, then that doesn't help them at all.
Right. And so simply my observation is today, the way the consortium defines confidential computing, the code confidentiality is not one of the properties that we list. And I'm just saying it doesn't have to be a required property, but it should be listed as an optional property.
Right. I think if the goal of this document is to help people check whether a solution meets the formal definition of confidential computing, that's less helpful than helping them understand the properties of something that meets confidential computing, but also meets the entirety of their requirements.
All right, so the goal of the document would be the latter. It would be helping, guiding the customer towards the solution that properly works. My concern, and I'm sensing that we're probably talking past each other, is
I think I hear your concern, and I agree with your position that we ought to be expansive on it and not restrict ourselves.
Okay.
And Mark, just to clarify, right? Like code confidentiality is a property that the CCC defines. It's just not a mandatory property for that was listed. At least that's my interpretation of it. It is so. If you look at the initial section, so there is code confidentiality, programmability, and recoverability are defined as additional properties, but are not deemed mandatory. That's what.
Okay.
That's the.
Okay. In that case, we're fine. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
it's probably a good place to leave the conversation at. I think this is a great thing to have introduced here, and sounds like you've got some work mapped out then for what you'll do. Take back to the GRC SIG, and then we'll see probably another draft here before you publish it formally.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks. It's great to see output from the SIGs. I think this is all helpful in enriching what we do here. So we will switch tracks now to the new project proposal, which is also something that we're excited to see. We are an open source organization, so getting to grow our project portfolio, so long as things meet our criteria, is one of our chief aims. So who will be presenting on behalf of VertTE today?
I don't have anything per se to present, but I'll be speaking on behalf of the VertTE organization. I hope everybody was able to get a chance to check out our proposal on the mailing list and any concerns, questions. I didn't receive any via my mail, but if there's any questions or concerns, I'm happy to answer.
Could we please look at that as you're talking? Generally, we tend to go through and ask questions of the document as we
Absolutely.
go.
Yeah,
Sure.
I've posted that link in chat.
Okay. Would you like me to share as well, or?
If someone could share it.
If you wouldn't mind driving us through the doc, then we can make sure that we've got everybody's questions covered.
Yeah, the submission template says that there's actually two docs, right? There's the submission template and there's a technical charter. And so we want to see both. The email that I saw only had the technical charter. I didn't see a submission template, but maybe I missed it.
I think that was the body of the email.
Oh, maybe. I'll go look.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Oh, yes, yeah, there it is. I just, okay. Thank you for.
Is everybody able to?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just go through a bit and follow along and add my own comments as I'm going. So we are the VertTE project. The name is kind of a play on words of virtualization and trusted execution environment. And what do we do really? We really describe ourselves as an open community dedicated to building components for virtualization, trusted execution environments. And we really develop a number of command line tools and libraries that are not tied to a specific hypervisor or such. Some of our things that we develop is the SEV Rust library for the interface to the Linux kernels, SEV and SMP interfaces, and a number of command line tools such as sevctl, which is a command line tool for managing the SEV firmware device.
You're on video.
I think somebody needs to mute. Go ahead. Sorry for the interruption.
No worries. We also have a KBS attestation server that we work on for attesting TDX, SNP, SEV workloads. And we also manage the KBS types crate, which is at least the Rust types for the key broker service protocol. And like I mentioned before, we're not tied to one specific project. Just for an example, our Rust library is used. We've developed it internally and used it within the libkrun project, which is a sort of confidential, not a confidential container project, where we call it confidential workloads. It's more about isolating processes and making those processes confidential. However, we've seen it used elsewhere in confidential containers, Enclave containers, and the Azure VTPM projects. So that's just one example of where we see some of our projects being used around the community, and some of the members of our community come from people working on those projects. We feel that kind of note I just made right there is what makes our project. That's what makes it valuable, is that we're not tied to a number of projects are able to use our tools to either facilitate development, or administrators using our projects to or our command line tools to better manage the systems. To the question, how this project aligns with the consortium's mission statement. As I said, we accelerate the acceptance of adoption by easing the development, like I mentioned before, of trusted execution environment projects. This can stem from developers leveraging our libraries to build the platforms, and administrators using our scripting tools, our command line tools to do things such as manage firmware devices, manage certificates on a system, and we also interact with the larger confidential computing and community in developing protocols such as the KBS protocol, which can be used in confidential VMs, containers. Our focus more has been workloads and isolated processes. And we've done things such as help manage the KBS types project and take place in those discussions to help bring that protocol to front. I've left our project website URL down below. We also have a blog on that project website, and we also have a matrix server where you can come and chat. I see that there's some stuff that I don't have to go there. This project's currently developed mainly by employees of Red Hat and AMD. We've seen other contributions from people in IBM, Microsoft. There's a few others, one-off kind of contributions, but those four would be the main developers at the moment. So I can start down to some of the technical information now. As far as our high-level assessment of our project synergy with existing projects, since we're like broad and general of the natures of the tools we built, we feel that some of the other projects, like how we've seen in the past, could get a benefit from what we build and can try to integrate that into their own projects to administer systems that they've built, or attest them on something such as a KBS server, something similar like that. As far as the trusted computing basis that we support, we have currently we've been focused on AMD SEV and SMP. We are starting to contribute more and more to TDX and such, and we're interested in any other architectures coming down the pipeline, such as ARM, potentially RISC-V. Our source control, mainly our projects are managed on GitHub. Each of those projects have their own issue checker that we keep track of and try to get try to get feedback as much as possible and try to fix the issues that we see. As far as external dependencies, mainly were developed in the Rust programming language and have mostly been building for Linux specifically. And some of the standards implemented by the project is the KBS. One of them, at least, is our KBS types crate is used for attestation via the KBS protocol. We don't have a specific release cadence for our projects. If you take our main project, such as the SEV library in this case, the landscape has been changing a lot. So we've really just been reacting to new changes, whether they be patches merged in the kernel, new features coming in kernels down the pipeline. We've really just been more reactive in releasing our software, just because the landscape is changing so fast. But as the platforms tend to mature, you get stable APIs in the kernel. That's when we would aim to have a specific time frame for a release cadence. But at the moment, it's been more of a reactive, to new features, new releases. And we really, our release cadence, at least right now, is upstream tag releases on GitHub, releases to crates.io for our projects that are developed in Rust, and Fedora Rail releases when we want to continue that. Some of the initial contributors are Alice Frogi, Sergio Lopez, Cole Robinson, Larry Dewey, and me, Tyler Finelli. And you can reach out to our chat on Matrix. As far as our security response policy, up to this point, we've just relied on our Matrix instance for people reaching out. What we've considered doing is setting up a mailing list for specifically for security concerns. So that's why I didn't really bring up a specific security response policy, because we're still deciding on how we want to go with that. I think that's about all.
Okay, I see Dave Thaler has his hand raised.
Sure.
Yeah, can you go back up to the sections 1.2 and 1.3? From everything that I've seen in the presentation we had before, I'm a big fan of this project and would love to see this come into the CCC. That said, I do have one comment or concern about one part. So if you look at so each of the ones under 1.2, my understanding is a separate repository under the same Virti org. One repository, and I think it's only one, I would have a concern about, and no concern about accepting all of the other repositories. The one that I have a concern about is the CCC, and that's because the CCC to date has not recognized legacy SEV as meeting the requirements for confidential computing. And I think it would go against the mission of the CCC in 1.3, were we to adopt a project that the CCC does not believe meets the confidential computing requirements. And so I personally would vote yes for everything except for CCC and no for CCC.
Okay, and one thing I'd like to say as well is we do have a basically SNP equivalent of CCC currently being developed. Called SMP host. That was, we've kind of also moved on, but we have basically two tools currently being co-developed.
Yeah, when I look at your repo, I see SNP guest. I love the SNP stuff. So like SNP guest and stuff. Yes, I vote yes, right. But I'm concerned if the CCC accepts any code that is inherently specific to SEV, not SEV SNP. Just because we've not recognized it, and I know there are some members of the TAC that believe that does not, and so that's my only concern. The rest of it, I'm a big fan of.
So specific question to that: is that SEV couple based on the old NOx SEV couple that was handed over to Red Hat, or is it? It is. Okay, fine. Yeah, I think we had it over because we weren't interested in supporting the old non-SNP version. Okay.
The SEV library as well is also based on at least the legacy SEV portion is based on the NARCS code, but that's
and as far as marketing stuff, it's fine if you can use. It's fine if somebody could use like SNP projects to work on non-confidential computing stuff, like other things like SEV, which may or may not be confidential computing, just because TAC has not taken a position. Either way, but members have taken a position, individual members anyway.
And we've pushed, if I could add, we've pushed, so you take something like the SEV REST library that offers SMP. We've also made it possible to compile that library with just SMP. We've seen a lot of interest in that happening. So that, I mean, that's something, so we are more focused on SMP, and like I said, we do have those hosts and guest tools coming down the pipeline as well.
And that's why I don't have any real concerns about SEV REST library, especially if like the README says, this is designed for SNP, and oh, by the way, you could use it for SEV as well, but our focus is on SNP. Then I think that that's absolutely within the mission, within the framework of 1.3, supporting the mission statement. It's only SEV CTL on this list here that I don't think there's any way to articulate that meets the mission of the CCC as presently constituted.
Okay, duly noted.
I was curious about the KBS implementation.
Sure.
So what is the goal of that versus the confidential containers KBS implementation?
It's Basically, well, this was the reference KBS, and we call it reference KBS because it was the initial KBS server built, and we called it reference KBS because when they were discussing how this protocol was going to work, we built this server as the reference for the KBS. So this was developed before the confidential containers KBS was built, and I'd say it's a bit simpler, at least for our purposes in confidential workloads. You're able to simplify a bit more and not attest as much. The attestation process is a lot less complicated than when you're attesting something like a confidential container, or even more, a confidential VM. So this was developed beforehand as a sort of reference to the protocol. We've kind of since ran with it and used it for confidential workloads because it kind of gave us what we were looking for. So it speaks the same protocol. It has some steps added in that are not part of the official protocol. But as far as actually attesting a guest and initiating that protocol, it should be the same because they both speak KBS. But it's just there's just a few small tweaks, mainly focused towards confidential workloads and libkrun, if you're familiar with that.
A bit. So libkrun is a little bit like the kata shin.
There are a few differences, but yes, you have the right idea. I'd be able to run confidential workloads, confidential containers such on something like container runtimes.
And when you say that you have to attest less for the reference KBS, could you say a little bit more?
So that's a good question. Confidential workloads, the memory space is immutable. As far as getting, it's kind of getting into how libkrun's architecture is built. Is there's a container context and then one single KVM virtual machine inside that container context that runs your workload, and thus you only have to measure the workload environment of that virtual machine, such as the firmware, kernel, and any shared devices that are being used. But when you have something, when you think of something like confidential containers using a continuous attestation, such as I think of something like Keylime in place, and such that there's continual attestation going on as measurements change. That's not a problem we find so much in confidential workloads, and more just isolating certain processes. So it's able to simplify it a bit more. We also don't really separate the KBS communication interface from the what's known as a verifier for actually doing the attestation. So just a few architecture changes that are specific to workloads. Sorry if I'm rambling. There's a lot of specific details that we with libkrun that.
Yeah, no, that wasn't rambling at all. I'm inclined to pick your brain more, but I think that would only interest me. So, in the interest of time, I'll sort of release that line of questioning. Any other questions from the TAC community? And Dave, while people are thinking of their last questions, what was the, how did we just land on your concerns with the SEV repository?
So today, Verti is a GitHub organization that has a bunch of repositories under it. I'm saying my proposal would be to put up for vote the sets of repositories that is not the SEV CTL ones. There's SEV CTL and a SEV CTL test. And so if you omit those two repositories and vote on the rest of the collection, that would be my proposal for how to put up a vote if the proponents are okay with that framing. And then separately, if it gets accepted, then do we need to do anything as far as how does the labeling go? Yeah, as far as which repositories are in the CCC and which ones are just Red Hat ones. We could figure that out maybe afterwards or whatever, but that would be my proposal.
I'm completely fine with that.
Great. All right, I'm not hearing further discussion. Would anybody like to move for a vote on including the stated repositories here as part of a new project for the CCC? Or do we need to have this document amended first?
Other than I can amend it as far as to address Dave's concerns of removing CCTO.
And I would be fine with a calling a vote now contingent on the CCTL portion being removed from the document, and just say we'll count it as, if the vote goes through, right, then count it as complete as soon as we see the change here, which I'm fine with Kurt and Dan just verifying before next meeting. So that would be fine with.
Just a note, which is, to the best of my recollection, what the TAC does is vote to recommend this to the governing board for inclusion. The governing board has never, I think, gone against a recommendation from the TAC in this matter, but we should be clear that there's a final step that needs to happen.
Yeah, agree.
Right, and also
actually, the other thing we should do, just in terms of due diligence, is you should bring up the technical charter on the screen, just because that's kind of what we usually do. I don't think there's anything to talk about there, but we should bring it up on the screen. But I'm fine going to a vote if you want, Dan. It's up to you.
Yeah, let's do the formality here and just take a quick look at the technical charter. So you don't have to read through the whole charter, but the parts that you've filled in for VERT-TEE. So what this charter is sort of a pro forma document, so that if a project doesn't have a governance structure, it can just inherit this one. For some projects, it's kind of heavyweight. For other projects, it's helpful in establishing things like what the steering committee is.
Such that I just said that the oversight of the Verdi project established by Verdi is a series of Linux Foundation projects, and I've just said that the mission of the project is to serve as an open community dedicated to building components for virtualization-based TEs. This is kind of our motto there that we focused on. And other than that, it's pretty much the standard. I've read over it and have no problem of anything here.
Okay. So licenses specified in there are Apache and the CDLA permissive 1.0 license for anything that's data related. I'm guessing you don't have stuff.
No.
And then do you already have some semblance of governance in the form of like a steering committee or anything like that?
Much of the, if not a specific steering committee, it's such that kind of informal has been more so just me, Larry Dewey and Sergio Lopez that have been kind of setting the direction for the project.
Okay. All right, so those are sort of the main highlights from this to be aware of, but you can modify this to suit your needs.
Sure.
Okay, so with that, why don't we go ahead and get to a vote on the VERT-TEE project, which we are going to define for this purposes as the 3 repositories that aren't SevCuddle and Sev, right?
SevCuddle test, I believe.
Correct.
All right, and that is maybe a little bit complicated for the notes. Do you have that captured okay, Kurt? just as a voting item, we should all be clear. Maybe if we go up to the Etherpad link here, I can take a look at.
Yeah, I believe I've captured the concerns, and yeah, I'll be happy to capture the vote.
Okay, so I read what you've got in Etherpad, so that works for me. Is everybody comfortable with that?
I don't know what's in Etherpad. Maybe somebody share a screen, or I don't know if you're calling a vote, then.
Yeah, we should probably be very clear on what we are voting on.
Yeah, I had recorded that Dave proposed to move forward without the 2 repos of concern, sub-CTL and sub-CTL test, and that they be removed from the submission.
Okay.
Okay, so we are going to take a roll call vote then on the verbally amended proposal, and then we'll get a written amendment to that to the list.
Dan, may I just make a point of order, just so everyone is aware that although I'm executive director, that does not entitle me to a vote. I execute stuff, I don't vote on stuff. So just to be clear, I can say stuff as I have, but I can't vote. So there you go.
Wow, we can finally tell Mike what to do.
Yeah, right.
Just kidding. Yeah. All right, let's vote.
That's the governing board's job, to try.
All right, I am just going to do a quick copy paste here into the agenda. Could have maybe done this into the minutes. And we will do, is these 2 that we are striking, right?
No. Only the second one. The sub-CTL test is not in the document, so only the 1 line. Yeah, that one.
Ah, okay.
The SEV. If you want to edit that one, then I would delete the SEV and from the slide, just because we talked about something like the README should say that it's focused on S&P, and gosh, it could be used for SEV2, but that's not the focus. And here SEV and is used first. So in this document, I might strike SEV and for the purposes of the vote here, as far as how it meets the CCC mission. So I would strike the line you have in gray, and then I would strike the words SEV and in the line above. Not that it's incorrect, just that what we're voting on is the S&P portion. The fact that SEV supports the S&P mission.
The right key combination here to do the strike through, and it's not working. There we go. All right. Okay, I think that is crossing the T's and dotting the I's. Maybe not dotting the T's and crossing the I's. All right, so let's go ahead and hit the roll call vote then. I assume we still don't have Giuseppe, so we'll move to Thomas.
Yes.
Yeah.
Big yes.
Eric is still not here, I assume. Catalin?
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Howard?
Aye, yes.
Thank you, Howard. I vote yes. Dave?
Yes.
Yes from Dave and Lily.
I vote yes. Sorry, I was trying to get off mute.
That's fine. All right, so that is all present in favor. I counted 6 votes in total there. So congratulations to Tyler and the rest of your community and VerTE, and almost officially welcome to the CCC.
No, you can't.
You got 2 more steps to go.
That's why it's almost officially. So,
Almost. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah. So
Thank you.
We'll shepherd this through the rest of the path. So one other thing that we will like to equip you with is a mentor, and we will not do that right now. But I would ask that everybody in the TAC community here, whether you are a voting member or not, think about whether you can help mentor the project. And the role of the mentor is to keep the project connected with the rest of the CCC community, especially the TAC, as often the project maintainers aren't available for the TAC meetings. So whenever we make a recommendation or we have some other business that the project should know about, we need to have a conduit there, as well as somebody to help progress the project.
Also, Tyler, I would ask if you would make those corrections that we noted in the agenda and forward me a new submission. And I will also work with you to get through the Linux Foundation project formation process to take this to the governing board.
Sounds good. I'll make those edits.
All right. Thanks again, Tyler.
Thank you.
All right, on to Mike and the survey. Mike, you are on mute. I think we.
Yep. Okay. So as you should all know, if you've been reading your email, there is a member survey, and everyone is invited and in fact encouraged, and I plead with you, in fact begged to fill it out. We absolutely happy to have more than one person per company, per organization filling it out. In fact, please email the link to other colleagues of yours who you know are involved in the CCC. And I have secured, I believe, 7 minutes to talk to this from our chair. And I've just actually put the link in the meeting chat. I'm not going to use 7 minutes. I'm going to go on mute and ask everybody who has not yet filled this in to go and fill it in right now. You have 7 minutes to do so. If you have filled it in, or if you do it quickly, you have time to take a bio break or get some tea or some coffee. So I'm going to be quiet now and come back at 17 minutes past whatever the hour is you're at. There we go. Please fill it in.
That was very clever of you. Be more cautious in allocating minutes to you in the future.
It was Ron Perez's idea. You can blame him.
I'm sorry, Mike. Now we only have 5 or 6 minutes.
Someone's sharing their screen. You probably don't want to do that unless you want to share what your responses are. So.
No, I'm not going to go through. I just wanted to bring it up for people to kind of look at if they were not filling it out. And we'll add this as stoppage time to the end of the game that we have here. resist humming the Jeopardy song here. But I think that might be time on this. Thank you, Mike, for a clever use of our time to get some work done during the meeting, which is something that we often do. We are going to move into the progression topics now. I am going to slip right in front of that, though, with this transition to Markdown, this migration to Markdown from our technical analysis paper. It looks like we've got a good set of comments in there. The only new comments that I see from the last 24 hours is some comments from Thomas recognizing that the images are not themselves present in the repo. My guidance to Kurt was, let's get the text in place first as a first PR, and then we can deal with more formatting, layout, and images thereafter.
Actually, the images are in the top level repo, and I did that so that you could review this as a markdown and they would be included. If this gets, if everybody's happy with this, when it gets moved to the to its location where it's going to live in our repo, then I will move the document, the actual pictures into that directory as well.
Okay, so you've got them at the root of the repo? Oh, I see. So, you've got
so I guess I think I'm aligned with Thomas, which is I would have expected the git move to happen as part of that same PR.
Well, I'll have to see if I can change the path so that it'll work properly for review.
Well, you do one of two things, right? Either you have the document reference the images back in their root, which would work right now. But if we want to move it under there, I agree that's better. And then as part of the, you do a git mv, and then you add those into the change list, and you push that, and it should render fine.
So, Kurt, is that something that sounds tractable to you to do with the existing PR? Or I'm also comfortable if we merge this PR as is with the text, and then we do another PR that moves the images in.
Yeah, that's fine. However y'all want to take care of it. If we could, since we have comments on this, maybe we just move forward with making sure the text is okay, and then I'll do your second proposal there, and then I'll get the pictures lined up in the repository correctly.
Okay, so I am inclined to merge this today if there's no other comments on the text. All right, that is a big milestone as far as I'm concerned, because we've been wanting to do this for like 6 months, and it turned into a very manual effort, and really appreciate Kurt going through that. I think it's somewhat remarkable that the main feedback was missing line breaks. So good job, Kurt. Okay, so back to the proper agenda. So we're going to talk about the badge first, and then get into PRs 160 and I think it's 171. But let me also just check with Howard, as it is quite late for Howard. Would you prefer that we talk about 160 first, Howard? Or are you planning on going the distance?
I don't think I can thinking pretty clearly now. If Dave can take the lead.
Okay.
Okay, it's pretty late.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're saying, given how late it is, you're fine with Dave driving here
Sure,
and you don't
sure.
have 60 before then.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Dave, did you want to share anything for the badge?
Depends on if everybody was here last time, then I don't need to. Otherwise, I can bring up something just to refresh people's memory, because the badge one, I wanted to propose a vote. But if people need a context refresh, or if there's new people here, I'm happy to reshare, because I don't want to take a whole lot of time on this. Although if people have discussion, that can be the majority of the time. So sure, I can share if you want to stop sharing your screen.
Yeah, so we can just do a quick refresh. So
Yeah, sure. All right. So the proposal, so the proposal, whoops, the proposal that I'm going to make is, you see all these badges here. If you look at the CCC projects, most of the projects use a bunch of badges, but they don't have this one right here, the OpenSSF Best Practices badge, that has some color and some word that's in here. That's what the badge generates. And so the proposal that I'm going to make is that we recommend, not require, but recommend that all CCC projects have an OpenSSF Best Practices badge in the repo, okay, as our recommendation, and we would push that out through the mentors to encourage every project to do that, but not strictly require it. So like in our D&I sense, we have things that are required, things that are recommended, and things that are resources, and I'm proposing this is in the recommended category. And I'm going to show you what that is. And so that's the link that I put in chat here. This is the page, and you can see all these other projects, major projects and stuff that do it. And ideally, a bunch of ours should be in the same category, right? Then here to just pull out some high-profile badge earners, right? And so they get your badge now. You go through this process here, and you need to GitHub login and so on. And you fill out a form that looks like, and I just clicked on this last time. It looks like this. You fill out this form, you answer some questions here, and you get a percentage, and then you click something and it gives you the little badge to put on your page. And so it's fairly straightforward. And so it's basically saying the Open Source Security Foundation has put together a bunch of criteria here about how mature projects are and how secure they are, whether they meet security requirements and so on. You can see there's like 16 different security criteria. And since this is like an emerging best practice that we're trying to get, across the OpenSSF is trying to get as many projects as possible to use the same criteria for whether they're secure and mature and so on, that this is a best practice in the industry. Some of the companies that participate in the CCC are actually members of the Open Source Security Foundation and contributed to this. And so rather than us reinventing this, that my proposal is we encourage all projects to just use this badge as it is and just display what their rating is. So that is my proposal.
And I fully support that proposal. I think that when we have made recommendations to the projects in the past, it felt a little disconnected to me whether we got strong engagement through the mentors. I wonder if there's some other artifact of recommendation that we could make with this, like an amendment to the like the annual report, that they report whether they have done this.
That is a great suggestion to say as part of our annual report template. And so if we vote to this is a recommendation, I would be happy to generate the pull request that adds that bullet into the annual plan proposal or checklist. I see Mike has his hand up too.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, so just it's a neutral comment, really. Do we, as a TAC, have or feel we should have views on the quality of the criteria set forth by the OpenSSF?
Do you mean, do we think that these are good criteria?
Yes.
My personal opinion is absolutely, and that's why
I think I agree.
That's why I commented that a bunch of the companies that are here represented actually had representatives in the OpenSSF that helped to create these. So even though us as individuals didn't,
indeed, and I think I generally agree as well. But I think that because we are a security organization in many ways as well, we should just be aware of the fact that we are, there are times people adopt badges because there are badges to adopt, and I don't think we're doing that here, but I think we should be quite aware of the fact that we are endorsing to one level the work they're doing, which I'm actually very happy about as we do this. I just want to raise that as a point for everyone to be aware of, in case there is anyone who's not had a chance to look at these or think that they're inappropriate, for instance.
Yeah, I'm briefly scrolling through the security ones, which is the ones that I would think that we care the most about, and you can see there's a short version, and all of these have a details. I think all of them do. Maybe there's one that doesn't, but all these have details with maybe sometimes there's references to published literature and so on topics. Yep. Like last time I showed their link to the definition of bus factor, which is a research paper that's now been adopted as a measure.
So I think the only question is, do we feel that everyone who wants to has had a chance to look through these criteria, given that you presented this last time? If so, then it's probably okay to move through to a vote. But if not, we might want to just give them another meeting to look at. Sorry to put a stick in the wheel.
It's fair. That's why I posted the link a couple days in advance.
Exactly. So I think probably people have had a chance, but and I suggest we probably should go forward for a vote today. But I just want to again give people the option.
Well, leave that up to you today to call, but I would love to get it to a vote. So.
Yeah, I am intimately familiar with this. I've taken a few projects through it, and one of the experiences I had was being unclear on one of these, and then being able to go to this OpenSSF best practices badge as an open source project itself and get clarity and suggest revisions to the text. So to Mike's point, I think if anybody, as they go through this badge, has issues like that, we have an open source process to resolve those and contribute upstream. So I'm going to go ahead and take a vote here. I don't think this is a roll call vote. I think this is more, is it an acclamation vote? Do we have any voting members of the TAC who wish to abstain from this vote? Any voting members of the TAC who oppose this vote? So hearing nobody abstaining and nobody opposing the vote, the vote passes to make the OpenSSF best practices badge a recommendation to each of our projects. And Dave has accepted the additional action item of adding a line to the annual report process. Awesome. All right, let me get back to the agenda slides.
And now I think the graduation stage thing is next, if I remember right. Yes. So if you want to additionally share anything on 160 or 171, we can do that. If I'm remembering the right issue numbers. I believe that's correct. So those of you who were last time know that, remember that there were two things that I proposed. Basically, pick either approach A or approach B, and that's where we want to go back now that people have had a chance, I hope, to at least think about it. Alternative one is to remove all mention of the graduation stage. And so that's what this pull request is. It just deletes the large block of graduation stage text, and it deletes all mention of the graduation stage as far as references up above, right? So that would be one nice, simple approach. It just says, we've got sandbox incubation. And by the way, separate from this pull request, not touched, is any discussion of emeritus. That's a separate issue, out of scope for today. We're just talking about graduation stage. So either we remove everything, or we got to, fix up stuff. And this one tried to capture the feedback that's done so far. Like you can see in graduation stage, there's typos. There's do we add anything about there's a couple of orthogonal things we could break down. But the first question I was going to ask is, should we have this discussion, or should we just say, let's take the simpler approach and not have the discussion now? And there may be people in favor of this approach, okay? But just to remind people what the issues were, now that we have an OpenSSF best practices recommendation, should incubation or graduation actually have some level that we do? And so you could have opinion on whether there's any rating on the questions there, as opposed to us maybe duplicating some stuff. We could maybe remove some things if it's already part of the badge. There's the discussion that was raised during Grameen about what's the affiliation, and so this part does that part. It's what's the right fraction? Is it less than 1/2? Is it no more than 1/3 or whatever? There is what's a healthy number and how is that defined? There was some ambiguity there, and so on. So all these different things are a whole bunch of orthogonal issues that were raised that we'd have to go through and talk about each of these if we want to take this approach. Or we could say we're not going to talk about those and go for the simpler approach. And I think we called time because I was introducing the topic for people to think about for this time. So I'm now reintroducing it to refresh your memory. And I think Mike had some comments, and I got the impression, Mike, you were actually in favor of this approach here. So I want to give Mike a chance to talk and share whatever his views are that we didn't get to last time.
So this approach being?
The remove graduation stage.
Yeah, so I did talk about this a bit last time. I think I wonder if we over-engineer it by having a graduation stage, and you've done a brilliant job in providing different options. And I think the question for the for the TAC and for the GB, of course, because this is another one of those where we make recommendations to the GB, is there something that we think is worthwhile? Is there worth in our maintaining this and doing this work, because it actually is a drain on our time as well. I'm not saying it's a bad drain, but there is a resource drain, and also is it good for the projects and for the community as a whole? And I honestly don't have a strong, certainly not decided view in either direction. The question I did have that I raised last time was, you could say things like, should a project further on in its cycle have more access to funds, or because it's growing, or should it have less access to funds because it's already done the growing? And I think those are the sorts of questions where, if you take this away, just say, well, we'll just be equitable and we'll do it on a case-by-case basis, and it's not going to be based on the stage. I think there's one of the other issues one of the possible issues is that, as you discussed, there are some quantitative, qualitative questions which we prefer to be quantitative, which are difficult to make decisions about, like the number of different maintainers from different companies and all those sorts of things. Which, if we decide we're not going to do this, we just sidestep. And simplicity is a good thing, and we've always gone with the minimum viable governance approach in this organization. I think there's a lot to be said for it, and I don't want in any way to downplay the amount of work you put. This has been fantastic, but I think that is one option to consider. So I'll shut up and let other people have their thoughts, please.
Yeah, I do want to hear from others, because I would be fine with either of these two approaches. That's why I submitted both PRs.
Yeah, please don't let it just be us old lags who were here for the initial discussions 4 years ago, please.
Yeah, I would certainly like to hear from others in the TAC here.
Maybe nobody else cares. If nobody else cares, the simplest approach is to go this one, right? This style right here, because it's a lot less work, right? And so if nobody has a preference between them, I always go for less work. So
I like that. I'm also thinking that we are on track to add more projects, and as we have a bigger pool of projects, it kind of makes sense to me to have 3 different stages: things that are just starting out, things that are maturing, and things that are sort of well established.
So I think that's exactly the opposite to what Dave just said.
Yep,
it is. So it sounds like Dan,
less work, but also the benefit as we get bigger.
Yeah, because going with this approach here, that removing the graduation stage, does not preclude us from being able to add it at some later point.
True.
So think in the interest of time, we do have Sandro's topic yet, as well as Simon's.
Yep.
Well, Dan, before, just very briefly, might I ask, even if, I think that it's going to come down to voting members. So I think it might be worth just polling the voting members now to find out if they have a strong view either way, not necessarily to say what that view is. If they don't have a strong view, that tells us something as well. Again, we can maybe do that offline, up to you.
Yeah, I'm going to encourage people to use the issues. And maybe I'll take an effort to ping people between now and the next meeting.
Thank you, Lily, for posting an answer in the chat.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure thing.
Okay, so let's pause this. Let's pause this topic now. I would like to switch to our tech talk. Thank you, Dave, for leading us through that.
Sounds good.
And we should be able to resolve that by next meeting. So, Sandra, if you would like to share whatever material you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me see. I think you now can see the screen, right?
Indeed.
Yeah, good. First of all, thank you for the invitation to join in this meeting and for this tech talk. And thank you for taking the time and the interest. We will be speaking on behalf of the BAO open source project. Myself and Jose are the founders of this project. We started like 2 years ago when Jose started his PhD under my supervision. Just a few notes regarding who we are. My name is Sandro Pinto. Jose is here next to me. We are from a university in Portugal, and you may have seen us delivering some talks. You don't see like the other parts of the screen, right? Like the bars. I think so.
No, we just see the slide itself. We don't see the slide.
That's perfect. That's perfect because I have an annoying bar here. And yeah, you may have seen us in delivering talks at the RISC-V Summit, or probably at Embedded World or Embedded Open Source Summit. Well, this is the agenda for today. We'll just share a few words regarding an introduction regarding virtualization, just make sure we are all on the same page. Then I will hand over to Jose to basically provide a brief overview over BAO hypervisor. Then Jose will continue with our ongoing efforts on BAO with regards to trust execution environments. And then I will get back at the end just to share a glance over our roadmap. Well, virtualization, as you know, allows the execution of multiple operating systems onto the same platform, mostly for resource management, abstraction, protection, and isolation. Well established for quite some time on servers and desktops. Over the last few years, what we have witnessing is the adoption also of virtualization in embedded industries in multiple applications, ranging from automotive, industrial control systems, medical device, and drones, for example. In the embedded systems, virtualization has few different requirements, not only in terms of consolidating or embedding different stacks onto the same platform, but also the requirement of having low performance overhead, in particular by leveraging the existing hardware virtualization technologies, but also these safety requirements make sure this temporal isolation and also the space isolation to make sure there is this assurance for freedom from interference. Then real-time requirements to make sure of predictability and determinism, but also security requirements. Nowadays, there is no safety without security and vice versa. In terms of hypervisor spectrum, and just to go to the point of BAO, so we typically have on left side of the spectrum these traditional hypervisors that are used in cloud and server applications. They typically feature a large code base. They typically depend on Linux. They are fully featured for communications, networking, and drivers, but they can have some overhead depending on the I/O. A particular example is KVM or Zen. Then we have this embedded hypervisor, which have a reasonable code base, around 100K of lines of code. They provide some soft real-time guarantees. They have schedulers that allow to basically consolidate multiple virtual machines atop one single physical CPU. And examples are Xvisor or Acorn. Then we have these microkernel-based hypervisors that resource to the use of capabilities and user-level components like VM virtual machine monitors. They are secure by design. Some of them are formally verified, like the CL4, but they have the trade-offs in terms of performance, interrupt latency, and complexity. Examples are, of course, CL4 and Nova. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we have these static partitioning hypervisors, a quite young branch of virtualization. They are really teeny tiny, very small code base, typically in the orders of a few kilobytes of software lines of code. They have strong guarantees in terms of isolation at the architectural and microarchitectural level, and they provide real-time guarantees. But they typically, because they are static in nature, they have inefficient resource usage, but they are highly used in mixed criticality systems. Examples are BAU, JLAUS, and this new version of Zen called DOM Zero Less. Well, static partition virtualization, as this goes, this strong focus on the isolation at the architectural and microarchitectural level to guarantee the freedom from interference to comply with these standards, for example, the ISO 26262 in the automotive, and they feature a minimal code base. They are static. They have this static resource assignment, one-to-one between virtual to physical CPU mapping, no memory management, device pass-through, and they typically resort as much as possible to the hardware virtualization support on the platform. One of the first hypervisors implementing this architecture on ARM was JLAUS from Siemens, but back then the problem is that JLAUS relies on Linux to boot, and based on that, when we start and decide to build BAU, there was still not this version of Zen DOM Zeroless that basically acknowledged the interest in this particular niche. And this was the main motivation for us to build BAU. Well, I will hand it over to José.
So, yeah, now I'm going to talk about the hypervisor itself. So BAU is a type 1 hypervisor following the static partitioning architecture that Sandro is talking about. And the target systems are mixed criticality systems with real-time requirements. So I think Sandro already gave you an overview of what static partitioning is. So you have only one-to-one vCPU to physical CPU mapping. So there's no CPU sharing, no scheduler on the hypervisor. Static, the memory assignment and allocation is static, is done either at build time or initialization time. We don't support any virtual devices, only device pass-through and hardware interrupt. So there's nothing like VirtIO or nothing of that sort. So, and for VM communication, we support only very simple primitives, which are shared memory and notifications in the form of virtual interrupts. And BAU is really a completely standalone component. It has no external dependencies, no external libraries, not even the standard library, and only uses like simple drivers for logging and that kind of stuff. So to be this simple, it does rely on the hardware virtualization support. So we only support platforms, architectures that have some kind of support for virtualization. And we have this focus on the internal isolation of the hypervisor. So internally, the hypervisor only really sees the data structures and the virtual machines that in a given core that it manages in a given core. So there's internal isolation in the hypervisor itself. We also have this really support for the super pages, which is essentially so you can have a really low overheads in this kind of hardware assisted hardware. And from the beginning, we have supported this cache coloring technique that allows us to partition cache. And the main goal is to avoid interference in the left level cache for to have deterministic and real-time guarantees for the gas. So we are able to color both the gas and the hypervisor, so that we don't have internal hypervisor interference in the cache between the multiple partitions. So here we see that, yeah, this kind of hypervisors really have a negligible overhead. It's almost not there. And we do this with about 8K lines of code. For some architectures, it's a little bit less. For some architectures, a bit more, but it's around there. Next slide. Yeah, so we also see that this cache coloring mechanism for cache partitioning, we use it to avoid interference, but of course, it also closes cache side channels that we have between the VMs. So in the past couple of years, we've been porting BAO to a lot of platforms. So BAO supports mainly two architectures, ARM and RISC-V, actually only these two architectures. And we've been porting BAO to a lot of platforms, and also have had a support for a few operating systems, mostly real-time operating systems, and then Linux and Android. So the first platform, and this is the main focus of BAO, it's ARM v8 platform. So regarding this architecture, we support most of the features that we believe are relevant to this kind of systems. For RISC-V, we also have been taking efforts to have a real strong support for RISC-V, and we've been there kind of from the beginning. We were one of the first hypervisors that supported the hypervisor extensions. And actually, it was our team that developed the first open implementation of the extensions on hardware itself. So, but now our focus is shifting more to this MPU-based microcontroller architectures, which you find, for example, in ARM v8 that is used extensively, or that is supposed to be used extensively in the automotive setting, and also other architectures like Infineon RX Strike Core, which also has recently announced support for virtualization. We are also starting efforts to port BAO to these architectures. Regarding this ARM v8 architecture, this was our latest big feature in the hypervisor, and the largest difference is that we don't have a dual stage and nested MMU in these architectures. What we have is a double stage MPU, which made us have large changes to the hypervisor, modify the memory management, modify the data layout, which relied a lot on virtual memory. And there was some challenges because these MPUs are really limited. They have a really limited set of entrances. So we really have to take care on regarding the hypervisor data layout. So, and also there's a few more modifications. So we had to port, BAO only had support for 64 bits architectures, but to the main architecture that is targeted by these ARM v8 platforms is 32 bit. So we ported BAO to 32 bit, now supported 32 bits in ARM v8 and also RISC-V architectures. And another point regarding this architecture is that, so if you know the ARM privilege levels, there's this EL3 monitor mode that's supposed to host the firmware, and that does a lot of the platform abstractions, platform initialization stuff, and you don't have this privilege mode in this architecture. So we did have to enhance BAO with some platform specific drivers, which we don't have to do in other architectures. So yeah, so now I'm going to talk about our efforts to support trusted execution environments in BAO. So because of our focus on the ARM v8 architecture, our main target was to emulate this kind of trust zone TEOS support for virtual machines. And when we started looking at this, there was mainly three approaches that we found. Was actually virtualizing the ARM secure world and have TEs run like using classic virtualization techniques, so full trap and emulate, which added a lot of overhead, as you can imagine. Second approach, which is used by hypervisors like Zen and has support, upstream support on OpTE, is to actually share the TE between the multiple VMs and the hypervisor as this TE supplicant that informs the TE about the VM context, and the opt-TE internally is kind of has isolated contexts for these VMs. And the third option is now we have support for hypervisors on the CPU world, and we actually can have multiple TEs and have one instance for each VM. So, and we do agree that this is the kind of the way to go, have VMs, TEs as VMs, and we see a lot of places like Protected KVM, Realms, RISC-V, the application trusted execution environment specification. They all are going in this route. But for our case, for static partitioning, this is kind of so static partitioning is really inflexible in its nature. So this requires us to, for example, share resources or share across the multiple partitions, which is something we don't want to do. And if you look at the privilege kind of level stack, you see that the secure things like an external hypervisor or an extra TE or shared TE will be part of the full system TCB, and we go to great effort so that we have this really low level TCB, because this hypervisor needs to be really small for being suitable for certification in mixed criticality systems. So we don't want to really add those layers. Also, these approaches are really not flexible. They only support this kind of model, OST model, and we really would like to have other models like process enclaves. They are not portable. They rely on trust zone, and even on ARM architectures, trust zone is not fully supported. As I said, the Cortex-R systems don't have trust zone, don't have the monitor mode, and therefore they don't have trust zone. So, and we believe that BAO being so small really can take the place of the security model, but kind of dedicating a core, if you use BAO like this, and you have to, as it is right now, you have to dedicate a core to a TE, which is really wasteful and not scalable. So our design goal in designing TE support was really to just relax this one-to-one virtual to physical CPU requirement that we have in BAO right now, and support a very flexible mechanism that we can relax this, but very simple, so that you can have extra virtual machines to run the TEs. And so we came out with this concept called VM stacking, which essentially allows us to statically define VM hierarchies, like trees of VMs, where the parent VMs have privilege over the children VMs and can invoke them, and then can inspect and modify their content based on some configurations. And essentially what we get is like this virtual infinite number of privilege levels, which kind of a lightweight virtualized nested virtualization approach, if you can look at it that way. So to host a TE like that, we had initially two models. We can have either a monitor VM that fully emulates what the monitor does on trust zone, or we can just host the TE as a parent VM of the operating system. So it is a higher privileged level, let's say. And we did this on both ARM and RISC. Recently we did it on RISC-V. So it kind of runs, the opt-TE runs unmodified on both architectures, and this can go seamlessly between the two architectures. There's some limitations, but for now we think it's useful. And we also been experimenting with this concept of the SGX-like process enclave. So here we use the children virtual machines of the stack to have the enclaves. And for this we modified BAO to allow dynamic VM creation, which was not possible before, and had to also limit the privileges of the parent VM, so that they can't really mess with the state of the children VMs. But this is all experimental, a bit academic right now, but we were able to run unmodified SGX applications on these enclaves over BAO. So to finish, that there are a lot of points that need to be addressed before we can really say that we support these kinds of systems. Fine-tuning the APIs and the abstraction, supporting shared devices between the multiple TEs probably will need it, and improve the efficiency of the enclave runtimes and the enclave VMs themselves. But yeah, for now, this is kind of a proof of concept. So Sandro will finish the presentation now.
Okay, thank you, Jose. So just a few words regarding the roadmap and what's our plans. So we just open source BAU in 2019. In 2020, we present first at industrial top tier venues like the Embedded World and the RISC-V Summit when we introduced the support for RISC-V. Then over the years, we had a lot of support for different platforms, feature-wise, and now we are more focused in trying to drive adoption. So we changed the license from, in the beginning was GPL v2, now we changed to Apache version 2. We are also completing a lot of documentation, user guide, port guide, that stuff that helps people to, or that helps onboard new people to contribute to BAU. In quarter 3, we will be focused on the infrastructure and development process. We will include the CI and CD and a proper test framework that we have already in pretty good state. And then till the end of the year, we'll try to focus on bootstrapping activities regarding to change the code to be compliant with coding standards like MISRA-C, and also this OpenSSF that was discussed here today is also on our radar. For 2014 and 2024 and 25, we will invest a lot in the technology readiness to go to higher TRLs. We are involved, and we know other people are involved in several multi-million R&D projects, but also being close to industry. And yeah, this is just a kind of illustrative image that includes different use cases that we know that BAU is being involved. For example, national projects, R&D projects with drones, but also projects that we are involved, sponsored, for example, in the UAE by TII, where BAU is being used as an exploratory pad. We are also involved in a multi-million European funded R&D project to build a reference security IoT stack, where BAU will be a key part of this stack. We are also, we have been discussing with a company that is willing to build hardware wallets and is interested in using BAU. We have been in contact with several industry companies regarding the use of BAU and potential or the exploration of BAU in this concept of zone controllers in automotive. And also we have been approached by parties interested in exploring BAU also in CubeSat applications. Well, if you like what we are doing, feel free to follow our media channels, either on GitHub, Twitter, or LinkedIn. You can also always start our project on GitHub. And just for reference, we have this BAU demos page on GitHub that basically has documentation how you can build different demos for different platforms with different real operating systems, so that you can have a try on BAU, either on Chemo or either in a real platform like the Raspberry Pi 4. And with that, I think I complete almost on time, and we still have very few minutes just if there are any particular questions.
Yeah, that was a ton of material very quickly. Thanks for getting us through all that. Very interesting stuff. I think it might have been slide 29. You mentioned the ability to run unmodified SGX enclaves.
Yes.
Sorry. This one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just say just a little bit more about that.
To tell the truth, this is not really my work. It's the work of a colleague of ours, which is not here now. But what I can say is he it basically writes some kind of ad hoc pair method. So the enclave runs on a kind of an ad hoc unikernel that you wrote, and it kind of abstracts a lot of stuff in that code, but that it's a pure virtual machine. Yeah, from what it tells, it runs SGS applications there without touching the code of the applications themselves, just having this kind of abstraction layer to allow the application to run in this unikernel.
And so the security properties are enforced by your hypervisor then, and not by anything at the hardware layer?
Yes, so the enclave is a VM. The enclave is a VM. The goal here is more the model, the process model enclave we want to mimic, not really the SGX extensions per se, but the model of the TE, like the programming model, the way you use it. That's our main goal here. So the enclave is really just a virtual machine, and the security is enforced as is for all other virtual machines on the hypervisor.
Got it. I see Dave's hand raised.
Yeah, so I know we're almost out of time, and so if you need to post stuff on the list or whatever, but I was going to ask if you could say anything more about attestation support and how that works to the hypervisor.
Yeah, this is in fact something that we have on the roadmap. We don't have at the moment implement this sort of mechanism, but it's something that we will start looking into, this kind of guarantees in terms of attestation. For the secure boot, for example, we leverage what exists in the target platform, but yeah, we are still exploring these additional mechanisms that are needed from a secure.
Okay, thank you.
Really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I think that brings us right to the end of the hour. If other people had questions they didn't get to ask, feel free to use the mail list, or our presenters had their contact info up on the last slide. So if you guys wanted to flash that one more time for everybody, you're welcome to do that. Otherwise, thanks everybody for your participation today, and please continue to work on our open action items through the next 2 weeks, and we will see everybody again in 2 weeks from now.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. I've had a bunch of 7 responses. Do more of them. Thank you.
And Simon, I'll work with you to get you scheduled for the next meeting.
Yes, sorry about that, Simon.
Yeah, I'm on vacation for the next meeting, so all the schedule for that week. So maybe a while, well, unless Thomas wants to do it.
I can take it, Simon.
Okay, cool.
Great, thanks.
Cheers.
Sorry.
Bye-bye.